Isn't that interesting? All the genes you need for everything are in every cell, but most of them are just turned off. Or imagine if the hair genes turned on in your eyeball and you have hairy eyeballs. Oh, no, that would be bad. Or a hairy tongue. That would be bad. Every cell that you have has a complete set of your DNA, which means don't leave any cells behind at the crime scene, or else they can sequence your DNA from even just one cell. And then if you're a suspect, they can be like, hey, can we have a blood sample? And they'd be like, we've got a match, guilty. Redeem Academy. Hey, what is up, Science Squirrels? Johnny here with Redeem Academy. I am here to help you get the most out of your education while giving God all the glory he deserves. We are on the DNA unit. How are we here already? And today is lesson 1, all about chromosomes. All right, I'm going to be telling you 3 things today. First one, DNA. What is that stuff? Number 2, chromatin. How does DNA coil up into magical thread called chromatin? And how does chromatin, number 3, coil up into the magical little U-shaped critters called chromosomes? Get your notebook to follow along at redeemacademy.org. All right, and now, big question, how does God do cable management in the nucleus? Let's hit it, let's go. When I hear the phrase cable management, it takes me back to my childhood. The days of the Nintendo 64, Mario Kart, and James Bond GoldenEye. Paintball mode. Pew, 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 pew. That's really when video games peaked. Now kids are playing Fortnite and they start getting in a gun battle and they just build towers. How does that make any sense? But cable management was a real issue back then because you'd be playing an all-nighter with your homeboys eating pizza and pretty soon your cables would turn into this mess right here. And you had to shut everything down, unplug everything. And it would be a solid 10 minutes before you could get that unmasked. If you are working in a server room, maybe your server trays look like this from all the Ethernet cables, or like this, and then you're the server guy and you gotta go into the jungle to try to undo things. I don't even know what that would be like. This is a good before and after of what server trays are supposed to look like, or look at this one. Wow, that is some beautiful cable management right there. Or if you're a gamer, which I am not anymore, you know, you have these nice like before and after videos where guys teach you how to like put all your cords in some nice trays with some zip ties and take care of everything. So cable management, in case you've never heard of that, is how do you get all of your cords to not make a mess? Well, God has a much harder job because he has a much smaller space and still 6 feet. That's like this right there, 6 feet. He's got to fit 6 feet of DNA into a cell that is smaller than the tip of a pin that would poke you. It's invisible, and he's got to put 6 feet of DNA into it. So he's really good at cable management. And not only that, it gets cut into 46 different pieces, and it's got to stay organized in there, or else the cell's going to have to self-destruct to prevent cancer or something. So we're gonna see his system today. How do you keep it all organized? Here's a sneak peek. He's gonna take this thread called DNA and he's going to wind it all up into this thing called a chromosome. Let's watch a little video of how it's done. We're gonna zoom in on your DNA. This is what you look like without skin. You are so cute. You have the best bone structure. Also, your circulatory system looks so good. Look how healthy your heart is. Great digestive system, large intestine, stomach, a couple of small organs in there, liver. We're gonna zoom in on your liver. Man, it's looking so fresh and moist. Zooming in some more on your liver. Okay, starting to see individual cells. Nope, we're looking at little units of the liver, and we can see this posit here. We can see blood vessel cutaways. Okay, see some red blood cells flowing through there. Oh, look, there's an ugly little white blood cell among the red blood cells. Okay, and then we can see individual liver cells. Look at the membrane on the liver cell. Very nice. Your membranes look so fresh. Ooh, look at all those cute little organelles in your liver cell there. Got some cell membrane there, got some mitochondria, some Golgi, and rough ER on the outside of your nucleus. Okay, we're going to zoom in on your nucleus to find your DNA. DNA's inside the nucleus, wrapped up in little chromosomes. Nucleus kind of looks like a wiffle ball. Going through a nuclear pore. Boom! There are your chromosomes hanging out, looking kind of funky. You've got 46 of them. Those two right there say that you're a boy. That's an X and a Y. Okay, and we're going to zoom in and we're going to see the thread of a chromosome unwind. That's called chromatin. And then those are nucleosomes. And each nucleosome has histone proteins in it wrapped around DNA, or sorry, I should say DNA wrapped around histone proteins. And now we're going to let the lady speak for a minute. Let's see what she has to say.
Twisted ladder.
Oh, DNA.
It is made up of 4 nucleotides, which contain different bases. Adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine.
Yes.
A, C, G, and T. A always pairs with T.
Always.
And C always pairs with G.
Always.
The order or sequence of these bases in specific sections of the DNA, called genes, carries the instructions for a cell's structure and function.
Beautiful. And now we're zooming back out. Those are nucleosomes wrapped around histones, chromatin, chromosomes. That's a whole picture of all your chromosomes. You have a whole set of all your DNA, all your chromosomes in every cell. We're going to zoom back out. This is just one liver cell among millions. There's your blood flowing through your liver again. There's your whole squishy liver, all your bones, and no muscles, just bones. You don't have any muscles, sorry, someday. And you are an ugly little monster thing. So that's crazy. Every cell that you have has a complete set of your DNA, which means don't leave any cells behind at the crime scene, or else they can sequence your DNA from even just one cell. And then if you're a suspect, they can be like, hey, can we have a blood sample? And then be like, we've got a match, guilty. My pastor was a really bad guy before he became a Christian. And he always said, it was so much better once I became a Christian because I didn't have to keep all my lies straight anymore, who I was lying to and telling what to. Can you imagine living a life where you're lying to so many people you can't even keep track of all the lies?
It sounds exhausting.
It is really good just to tell the truth all the time. You don't have to keep track of who you're lying to about what. Also, really good just not to break the law. Don't have to worry about where you left your DNA. So like I said, this stuff is called DNA. They briefly mentioned in that video that little sequences of DNA are called genes. And genes code for individual proteins. The little units that make up genes come in 4 varieties, G's, C's, A's, and T's. Those are called bases for short, or nucleotides. And G's always pair with C's. A's always pair with T's. We'll talk more about that later. One other thing you should notice is that the G's, or the sequence here, G, T, C, A, C, notice that that one's, you can read it, but then this one's upside down. So DNA actually runs in opposite directions, just like traffic. You got traffic going this way, and then you've got traffic going that way. So it's like two-way traffic. And so we have a funny word for that. We say that it's anti-parallel. So let's write a few of these words down. So DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. You learned that in the last unit. The name for the fact that DNA's 2 sides run in opposite direction, two-way traffic, we call that being anti-parallel. The 4 bases that make up DNA, A's always go with T's and C's always go with G's. Now I mentioned already that DNA, you have 6 feet of DNA in every cell, a complete copy of your DNA in every cell, and that the short little segments of it that code for one protein are called genes. Okay, here's an interesting challenge. Can you tell what this is? I don't know if I like the noise I'm hearing. What is this? Strange noise. Hooks. Oh, it's Velcro. Did you know that Velcro works just by loops hooking onto little hooks of plastic? That's how Velcro works. Super sticky stuff, right? Well, this is also how I think of DNA wrapping up. So this was like the first video that ever came out of DNA wrapping up, and it was like 14 years ago. But that little piece right there is called a histone. And see how it's got those little hooks on it? And I just think of it like sort of like little pieces of styrofoam peanuts that are also Velcro. They begin to wrap up the DNA, and they form these things called nucleosomes. And then the nucleosomes grab onto more nucleosomes, and they start coiling up the DNA really tight on itself. And the coils of DNA and more of those histone proteins that form nucleosomes form a fiber called chromatin. And then that chromatin fiber starts to coil and coil and coil. And then you get these supercoils. At some point, they start calling them supercoils. Ooh, these coils are so coily. Let's call them supercoils. And the supercoils eventually coil up until they're like a whole leg of a chromosome. And eventually, they zoom out and they're like, look, it's a whole chromosome now. And the cell has chromosomes that you can actually see. Now, up until this moment right here, this is a real video of an actual cell that's about to divide. Up until this moment, it was all just an animation. Now, I want to see, how old is this video? I feel like I've been 15 years. This video is almost as old as my teaching career. Okay, I started teaching 19 years ago. I'll tell you, 15 years ago, when there were videos of this on YouTube for the first time, YouTube's always been my teaching partner. But check this out, the cell's about to divide. And any minute now, it's going through anaphase. You're going to learn these names in a minute, in like 3 lessons. Telophase, cytokinesis, ka-chow! It cuts in half. And now there are 2 cells. And so the cell went through a division. And that's when chromosomes actually show up in the cell. Most of the time, the DNA is kind of loose, sort of halfway in those nucleosomes. But they really tighten up when it's time for the cell to divide. So we come back over here, you take the DNA and you wrap it around those little proteins that are kind of like Velcro, that are kind of like packing peanuts and Velcro. They're called histone proteins. And every time you have 8 histone proteins and a bunch of wraps of DNA, you call that a nucleosome. Okay? And so every nucleosome then starts to wrap around every other nucleosome, and then it forms a thicker thread. And so as we're going this direction, we're zooming out, zooming out, zooming out. It's getting farther and farther away until it's like a thread. And this thread we call chromatin. Now, it's the same idea. I have some rope here. Rope. Imagine that I have 50 feet of rope. What do guys do when they need to coil up their rope? They take it, they put it around their arm, and they start going like this.
Helicopter, helicopter.
And I have now made a supercoil of rope. And it's like my chromosome of rope. I've made a chromosome of rope. And in the same way, God takes our DNA and he wraps it up into much more organized little units that are useful in a number of ways in the cell. There's even little tags that God puts, chemical tags, on those nucleosomes to say, hey, this one's useful, hey, turn this one off. There's little tags on and off that go on the nucleosomes. But God wraps up our DNA into chromosomes, just like I wrapped up this rope into a little unit of rope. And so the final product of wrapping up chromatin is called a chromosome. Oh, and I just realized I missed one. One leg of a chromosome is called a chromatid. Okay? So chromatid is a leg. Let's write the word leg here. And chromatin with an N is a fiber. So those are 2 very similar words. Chromatin is the fiber, chromatid is the leg. And then the last thing, this center part right here will get pulled on sometimes, and it's like an anchor that can be pulled on, and it's called a centromere. All right, so let's get over to the fiber here. The protein that DNA wraps around to tighten up, those are called histones. A unit of 8 histones wrapped around DNA is called a nucleosome. A fiber that forms when nucleosomes condense together, which means come together, is called chromatin. The structure that forms when chromatin condenses together, DNA all wrapped up, is a chromosome. The leg of a chromosome is called a chromatid. And the center of a chromosome is called a centromere. All right, I know that's a lot of new words, so I actually want to watch another video reviewing the same ideas.
A chromosome is an entire chain of DNA along with a group of stabilizing proteins. You may have seen images showing DNA trapped inside a chromosome, sort of like this. This is not how chromosomes hold their DNA. If you were to unravel a chromosome, you would see that it's made of a thread, sort of like a spool of yarn. Zoom in again and you'll see that fiber is a collection of protein orbs called histones, which are wrapped with a string-like structure.
Did you hear how he said zoom in? So every time something pops out of this diagram, it's getting closer to you.
Zoom in on that string and you'll find that this is the chain of DNA. It is extremely long, millions of nucleotides long, and often contains hundreds of genes along its length. In this image, we're looking at a chromosome in its condensed, yarn-like form, but
when I was a kid, my mom used to take me to this store called Joann Fabrics. I don't know if that's a national chain or not. And you go in the store as a kid and you're like, where are the toys? And you walk through every aisle and there's nothing but stuff like a spool of yarn like that. And so you end up playing football with your brother with a spool of yarn. But a spool of yarn is a perfect example of a chromosome, okay? It's a bunch of thread wound up really tight, and a chromosome is a bunch of DNA thread wound up really tight.
chromosomes are only packaged tightly like this when a cell is reproducing. This structure helps with durability as the cell is splitting in two.
Boom, cell division.
For most of a cell's life, however, chromosomes exist in a loose, noodle-like structure along with other chromosomes safe inside the nucleus or
Noodles. I could go for some spaghetti right now.
centerpiece of a cell. Here is a photograph of an entire set of human chromosomes taken from a cell right as it was getting ready to reproduce.
That's the real thing.
Your genome, the entire collection of genes that help make you who you are written across 23 pairs of chromosomes. That's 46 altogether.
That one's from a boy.
With very few exceptions, each cell in your body contains its own full copy of your chromosomes, your entire genetic code. Eyeball cells only use the eyeball cell genes. The rest.
Isn't that interesting? All the genes you need for everything are in every cell, but most of them are just turned off. Imagine if your hair cells, or imagine if the hair genes turned on in your eyeball and you had hairy eyeballs. Oh, no, that would be bad. Or a hairy tongue. That would be bad.
Are turned off. Liver cells only use liver cell genes.
Something about that liver slapping down was very satisfying to me.
One member of each pair of your chromosomes came from your mother.
All right, we'll get into the rest of that later. So this doesn't have to make total sense to you yet, but just seeing, okay, there's these things called chromosomes. They're made of DNA. If that's starting to connect for you, you're doing just fine. Okay, let's review the big question. How does God do cable management in the nucleus? God created a system where 6 feet of DNA can fit in a cell because it coils up super tight around histone proteins to make nucleosomes that then make chromatin fiber that then condenses into a chromosome. Amazing. You wouldn't believe it if it wasn't proven by microscopes. It's just incredible. And then that DNA can code for all the things that make up our bodies and make us who we are, and then make it possible for us to reproduce and have children that look just like us, just like a mixture of us and our spouse. It's absolutely miraculous that it actually works. The chemistry of human biology is absolutely stunning. Every time I study it, it makes me believe in God. He's just amazing. The designs he's created, humans can make nothing like it. Nothing that even scratches the surface compared to what God's made. He is so amazing, the things he has done. It just leaves us in awe and wonder. I hope you're starting to enjoy the mystery and the wonder of studying DNA. It's only going to get better from here. Hope this was a great lesson for you. Peace out, brown trout.